Hello, everyone, and welcome. Just want to let you know that we're going to give attendees a minute or two to join, and we're going to be getting started momentarily. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our first webinar series of 2021. My name is Daisy Galan. I'm here with the National Association of County and City Health Officials, and it's our pleasure to welcome you to our webinar today. This is a series of webinars that we hold quarterly as part of the Model Aquatic Health Code Network. And today we'll be discussing the results from the vote on the code, a review of the significant changes to the MAHC 4th edition. Joining Nature, we also have our colleagues from CDC and also the Council for the Model Aquatic Health Code. They will be presenting today, and then we're gonna follow up with a Q&A session. So before we get started, we just want to go through some of the logistics. Today's webinar is being recorded, so we will be sharing the link with the recording with all the registrants after the webinar. And you also have a copy of the slides that we're going to be presenting today. Throughout the presentation, we welcome any questions that you may have. You can submit your questions via our Q&A box or also via the chat function. So please submit your questions and we will get to them by the end of today's webinar. So with that, I'm gonna pass it on to Joe Lako at CDC for some introductions and welcome.
Thanks, Daisy. I appreciate everybody giving us a little bit of your time today to come back to our webinar series on the MAHC network. I just have a few updates. A lot of the updates that I could go into detail about in regards to the MAHC are actually going to be covered by our speakers today. The review of the 2018 third edition of the MAHC and the proposed changes for the fourth edition. Some of the big announcements that are kind of obvious to everybody is we are under a new administration with the swearing in of a new president last month. And with that comes a appointment of a new CDC director. So we've recently welcomed Dr. Rochelle Walensky. She is an HIV/AIDS researcher, and she comes to us through Massachusetts General Hospital, as well as being a professor of medicine at Harvard Medical School. So there probably will be a few changes and priorities in the coming months and for this administration. And CDC will continue to champion for public health of the nation. I'm going to turn it back over to Daisy and let her introduce our two speakers.
Thank you so much, Joe. So today we are joining by two speakers from the Council of the Model Aquatic Health Code. First, we have the pleasure to have Christy Rister with us. Christy joined the CMAHC as an executive director in June 2019 after spending 20 years in public service, working her way up from lifeguard to community service director, where she oversaw parks, recreation, aquatics, libraries, and special events. Christy discovered her passion for community service would lead to a career while at University of Arizona, where she received a Bachelor of Science degree in psychology. She has also a Master of Administration degree with an emphasis in public management from Northern Arizona University. Christy has been a certified Parks and Recreation professional since 2008 and is currently serving the Arizona Parks and Recreation Association as president. We also joining Christy today, we have Dewey Case. Dewey serves as the technical director for the CMAHC. Working in aquatics industry for over 20 years, he has served the YMCA of the USA, as well as local and state chapters of the American Red Cross by providing expertise in aquatics. Prior to his current role with the CMAHC, Dewey served on the first and third editions of the MAHC in a volunteer role, holding multiple instructor trainer certifications from the American Red Cross, as well as instructor credentials with Pool and the Hot Tub Alliance. Dewey enjoys helping others aquatic facilities improve operations and help young aquatic professionals hone and develop their craft. So in addition to his service with the CMAHC, he also serves as the Association Aquatics Director for the Family YMCA of Southeast Mississippi. Dewey resides there with his wife in Mississippi. So it's a pleasure to have both Christy and Dewey with us. And with that, I will pass it on to Christy to start today's presentation.
Thanks, Daisy. Please go ahead to the next slide. Okay, so we're going to be talking about revising the MAHC, and for this presentation, just because of the sheer amount and volume of CRs that we received this year, we're going to be discussing the most significant change requests today. And change requests will be covered by topic or MAHC section. So specific code numbering is going to be omitted for this presentation. If you have any questions or want any follow-up on that, please don't hesitate to put any questions in the chat box or send us an email if you have more questions on that. And then for a full listing of the change requests and the recommended vote to the CDC by the CMAHC Board of Directors, you can visit our website at www.cmahc.org, and you'll be able to find how the membership voted, and what the Board of Directors are recommending go forward into the new addition to the CDC. You can find that there as well. All right, next slide, please. So basically, at a glance here, we received 530 change requests, which is a huge increase from the past that we've received. So we usually receive about 200 or less. And so you can imagine how overwhelming it was for all the committees and all the teams to go through 530 change requests. Of those 530 change requests, 61% were passed. So that's approximately 320 of the change requests that were brought forward passed. And of those 327 change requests where votes differed between the CMAHC and the Board of Directors or the CMAHC Board of Directors and the membership. So essentially, there were 7 change requests that the Board of Directors are recommending a different recommendation from how the membership voted. And so we'll talk a little bit more about those in a minute. Next slide, please. So we have obviously experienced unprecedented times, with the pandemic and everything that's happening. And along with that, we've received 530 change requests. So even outside of a pandemic, it is very challenging under normal circumstances to have 530 change requests to review and go through. So it was a significant obstacle. We had amazing technical review committees and subcommittees that worked really hard. It was a lot of work, a lot of volunteer hours, and we are so thankful to our committees. And then we had a really great conference where we were able to process and go through all those change requests, and people were able to provide feedback. So that did go really well, our virtual Vote on the Code conference. The Technical Review Committee, they have, there's about half public health officials, and the pandemic took priority, of course, because of the pandemic. It was really hard for our public health officials to participate. So we had a 2-month delay in that review process. Some other recruitment challenges that we face, it's really challenging for us to get public health committee members. They can be difficult to recruit. So any of you out there, we definitely need your help and support. We encourage you to become members. We'll talk a little bit more about that at the end. But we definitely need your guidance and participation. So we appreciate everybody that participated. And I know it does make a little time for external work with their workloads, especially through this pandemic. So we're very grateful. And we need public health representation at every level. So with that, if you want to turn it to the next slide, Daisy, and I will pass it on to Dewey.
It would help if I unmuted. Thank you, Christy. Thank you, Daisy. So a majority of the change requests that were submitted were actually editorial in nature, and these were really geared towards just providing clarity and cleaning up the language, so to speak. So some of these basic edits were included modifying language for consistency. For example, there were some areas where barrier was used incorrectly and enclosure was used incorrectly. So there were several, probably at least 30 of those CRs to clean that language up. A lot of these editorial changes also sought to eliminate unnecessary or repetitive references, and also clarifying language on applicable codes. So the large thing was in the MAC as it was, we had listed state or local codes, and the new language is all applicable federal, state, local codes or ordinances. So a little bit of a change there just to make sure that all the bases are covered. And of course, clarifying terms and modifying some definitions. Most notable is breakpoint chlorination, where we're no longer calling it superchlorination. Next slide, please. One of the interesting areas is, and obviously as health officials, you deal with this on a daily basis, is there is another industry code, the International Swimming Pool and Spa Code, that is quote unquote owned by the ICC. So back in around 2018, a committee was formed to harmonize these two codes. So we looked at the two codes, and the MAC came up with about 9 different areas that had to be changed, and the ISPSC came up with around 15 different areas that would be changed. So with this edition of the MAC, this vote, all of those areas to harmonize have been included, and then edits are supposed to be made to the ISPSC with its next cycle sometime this year to move towards harmonizing with the MAC. And then once we get everything harmonized and everything goes through, then we'll start the whole process again, just to make sure that we have some harmony with these two codes. And I do want to clarify in that we're harmonizing construction standards. That's the area of focus. Next slide, please. Yep. So what were some of these areas? One is adding in the usage of computational fluid dynamics, CFD, in the design process. This is actually one of the areas that the board of directors overturned in that there were conflicting CRs, where it was allowed in perimeter systems, but not necessarily in the overall recirculation flow. We sought to limit depths adjacent to sun shelves and requiring also steps to access. We clarified handrail spacing, specifically on vertical rise on stairs and the dimensions of recessed steps, most notably making exception for preformed steps that can be used. The most interesting is modifying no diving language, signage rather, to remove the words no diving and utilizing the universal symbol for no diving. Now, all this did is this dropped the requirement that no diving is present with a sign. We see many no diving signs put into the deck and on the side of the pool wall that has no diving in smaller letters. This was eliminating the 4-inch letter requirement and of course making no diving as far as written words optional. And then harmonizing language for sofas, suction outlet fitting assemblies to comply with APSP 16 and updates to the Virginia Graham-Baker Act. Next slide, please. So again, the two areas that there were differing votes from the board of directors and also membership. And these were also to clarify contradictions. So in both of these examples, no diving as well as CFD, the membership voted to approve a similar CR, but not approve another CR with similar language, right? So for example, for no diving, membership approved removing the mandatory use of 4-inch lettering from the code itself, but did not approve a definition for no diving signs. So the board voted to rectify that particular discrepancy. And same with CFD, as I mentioned earlier, on perimeter systems, as well as the main body of water. Next slide, please. Where things really get interesting is in cyanuric acid. Cyanuric acid is definitely a hot button topic. It is definitely can have charged opinions. But CMAHC formed a committee back in 2016 to look into the issue of chlorine stabilizers and isocyanurics and to do research and provide guidance to the MAHC and ultimately submit change requests. In general, these change requests were influenced by an article submitted in the journal Water, and I will make sure Daisy has that link to send out a little bit later, or we can get it put in chat. That's also a possibility. Most of these change requests were not supported by the TRC or membership. In many ways, there were conflicting change requests, and we were trying to, the TRC had a goal of trying to eliminate those conflicts. On many of these change requests, although it is science-backed, we had to take a step and remember that the MAHC is intended to be evolutionary, not revolutionary. And some of these change requests did bring up concerns on, is this a too revolutionary concept? Are we moving too far, too fast? So when we were looking at these change requests as a TRC and as a board of directors, that was one area that we looked at is this going too far? Is it more evolutionary versus revolutionary? Next slide, please. So what did pass in cyanuric acid? One is to modify the definition of free available chlorine. So now free available chlorine will be referred to as DPD-FC. And this is to reference the test, that the hand test is made at the pool versus the actual level of available disinfecting power, hypochlorous acid, from a chemical standpoint. So DPD-FC just looks at your actual hand test. Also, the inclusion of response curves for HOCl, hydrochloric acid, when cyanuric acid is used, will be put into pool operator training courses. It requires a minimum testing frequency of weekly for venues that do utilize cyanuric acid, either as a standalone chemical compound or isocyanurics included in trichlor, dichlor. And the most probably significant change request that passed was a modification to imminent health hazards. So prior to this change request, the MAHC did recommend a maximum operating limit of 90 part per million, but that's as far as it went. It didn't recognize anything else as far as maximum cyanuric acid levels. So this particular change request gives pool inspectors the ability to close the venue when the total cyanuric acid exceeds 300 part per million, and this is in keeping with EPA guidelines, or when the cyanuric acid and free chlorine ratio exceeds 45:1. So let me back up and just kind of mention briefly about the work that came from the Stabilizer Ad Hoc Committee. They worked very hard and created a model that indicates that a ratio range of 20:1 cyanuric acid to free chlorine up to 45:1 roughly has the same basic relative risk. And this is where we talk about revolution versus evolution. There was much discussion held on having the lowest number possible, but the model that was developed by the Stabilizer Committee didn't quite support going that revolutionary of a practice. So this is where the ratio of 45:1 comes into play. This is also the de facto ratio that the MAHC holds, where currently you're required to have 2 part per million free chlorine and an operational maximum of 90 part per million. So again, that gives us that 45:1 ratio, which is in keeping with the model developed by the Stabilizer Committee. Next slide, please. So some CRs that were passed by membership but overturned by the CMAHC Board of Directors. One was a change request that was intended to make tracking a ratio much simpler in that it gave a range, a minimum chlorine level, let's say 2 part per million for, up to 20 to 30 part per million cyanuric acid, somewhere in that range, right? And there was a whole chart there going through all the way up to 90 part per million. So although it did help the inspector and the operator without having to do any sort of math necessarily, it did go with the lowest of the ratios predicted by the model. And we felt that was way too revolutionary. Some of the impacts on operators, that are concerns are staffing issues for one, the additional manpower it takes to keep that low of a ratio with the additional water it takes. And it just wasn't quite supported by the model. The model did give a wider range. So we definitely need more research there. And then another change request that would result in end-of-day pool closures when cyanuric acid levels exceeded 90 part per million, and to remediate to at least 75 part per million before reopening on your cyanuric acid level. Again, this was considered slightly more revolutionary versus evolutionary. And then the other downfall to this particular CR was that 75 part per million was an arbitrary number. It is not necessarily based on any sort of scientific evidence or value. So again, these were considered more revolutionary and were a major change from guidance found in the MAHC. And again, we will be looking at areas of research to help refine this and seeing if the data does support lowering this ratio in the future. Next slide, please. Other CRs that were submitted were for novel aquatic venues, specifically surf venues, you may know them as surf pools, and artificial swimming lagoons. These are really, really interesting venues that are starting to pop up across the world and across the country, that they are massive, massive bodies of water. And they definitely are challenging to try to figure out how that fits into the MAHC process and how those should be regulated from these local jurisdictions that are dealing with them. Committee work happened from 2018 to 2019 that produced change requests to include these unique and very complex venues into the MAHC. During the discussion, the Technical Review Committee and Technical Support Committees provided comments and indicated that these change requests needed a bit more additional work before they were included in the MAHC. So therefore, the TRC recommended a no vote to membership, and this was affirmed by CMAHC membership. Committees are being reconvened to work on these change requests, and this will be spearheaded by CDC and with supporting help by CMAHC. And the goal is to ultimately release standalone guidance documents from CDC, and then eventual hopeful adoption into the 5th edition MAC in 2024. Next slide, please. Some of the more, I guess, run-of-the-mill changes. So when we look at section 4 to design and construction, some significant changes there really happen around air handling and ventilation. And these are a series of extremely complex change requests, really looking more at providing balance to, or guidance rather, to air handling, to air pressures, clarifying references to ASHRAE, really lots of interesting things. The most interesting, in my opinion, was technical improvements to air handling that include limiting airflow to 30 feet per minute and an increased focus on moving air over the water surface to help get rid of those disinfection byproducts, those DBPs, that's a tongue twister, that cause a lot of the odor, the discomfort that contribute to develop of chloramines in pool water, and to really get that clear to have really high quality air and healthy air. Among these CRs include an increase in the ability of the authority having jurisdiction to issue a stop work order for unsafe conditions or code violations at this stage. And this does not necessarily tie only to air handling. This is just in the design and construction altogether. And then also the addition of reference tiles for depths 10 feet or greater, using a 4-inch by 4-inch tile. Next slide, please. For section 5, operations and maintenance, this includes a lowering of the lowering of the bottom range of pH to 7.0 instead of 7.2. We had a similar CR that was submitted back in the 3rd edition and for 2018 that dropped it down to 6.8. However, a big concern going to 6.8 was, even though it increases the sanitizing power of chlorine, there were significant concerns from manufacturers on the impact it would have on copper exchangers and pool heaters. But dropping down to 7.0 does get us closer to that neutral pH range and also increases sanitizing power for your hypochlorous acid. It modifies the requirement for an 8 by 8 inch reference tile to a 4 by 4 reference tile, which will tie to section 4. Multiple modifications defining barrier and enclosure to better conform with MAC definitions. As I mentioned earlier, in some aspects, in some of these lines of code, barrier was used incorrectly, where enclosure would have been a better choice, and vice versa. And then also for unguarded aquatic venues, it requires a person 8 years old or older to supervise persons under the age of 14 years. So this is a step up in refining what the MAC considers to be an appropriate supervisor for these unguarded venues, for these bodies of water without lifeguards. Next slide, please. For section 6, policies and management, some of the major changes here are changing the requirements for lifeguard supervisor course prerequisites. In the prior edition, there were some arbitrary numbers that have been used to define what a lifeguard supervisor is, and those have been removed. It also requires having a lifeguard where a slide discharge is over 5 feet deep. And then as a new requirement for the venue owner, it's a requirement to close the pool if they discovered an imminent health hazard, and this would be apart from the pool inspector. So as part of the inspection process, obviously they need to report this, but instead of waiting for an inspector to come and close, then the venue operator will be required to close if that's discovered. Next slide, please. Yep. With this, I'll turn it back over to Christy.
Thanks, Dewey. All right, So next steps, what does this all mean? So now what happens is that the votes are reviewed by the CDC, and mainly the recommendation that is put forth from the CMAHC Board of Directors. So it goes through all of their process. I believe there's 3 different departments that actually review it and make their recommendations before everything is finalized. And then right now, an annex committee is being formed, and their chart of work will be finished hopefully by the end of March, early April. And for those of you that aren't familiar with the annex is a supplemental document to the MAC that really goes through all the rationale and details out the code language that's in the code. So it's a really nice supplement to explain why the codes are written the way they are. So that's a really great document that will be updated along with the 4th edition of the MAC. So, and then hopefully it will be released. The goal is the summer of 2021. So hopefully, I know we shoot for by the end of May as pools are getting ready to reopen for the summer months. So that's always the goal, but it will definitely be out this year. So Daisy, if you would go to the next slide, please. So we would definitely love it if you became a member of the CMAHC today. It is a great time to join. It's only $90 for the next 3 years. So that'll take you through the next voting cycle. Our membership does increase every year before the vote on the code. So now is definitely the time to join. With your membership, you get discounts on webinars and trainings. You get free access to MAC presentations and case studies. Of course, it enables you to get involved and join a committee. We definitely would love to have some more diversity on our committees. So we look forward to you getting involved. And then, of course, it helps you make your voice be heard. So, you know, the more people that we have participating, I think the better the MAC will become. So please become a member today. And if you have any questions about that, don't hesitate to reach out. I'd be happy to answer any questions. Next slide, please. And here is my contact information along with Dewey's. So if you want to get in touch with us, this is the best way to do that. If you're also on Facebook, the CMAHC now has a Facebook page. So I want to encourage you to join like and share our Facebook page, and definitely follow us there. We are always putting up a lot of great new content. So I think with that, we'll go to any questions.
Yes, thank you so much, Christy and Dewey, for going through in very detail all these changes. This is very, very helpful. So now we're gonna open up our Q&A portion of today's webinar. Just as a reminder, you are welcome to submit your questions via our Q&A box. We see some questions coming in through here. So please continue moving, adding those to the Q&A box, and we'll be glad to answer them. So to get us started, we want to answer one of the questions that was submitted via the chat. And I know we added an answer here, Joe, but I was wondering either you or Dewey or Christy might have anything else to share with our participants. And this is related to the MAC and also related to the International Swimming and Spa Hot Tub Code. So if you guys could clarify when is the MAC enforceable or is not enforceable, or and then seems to be parts that overlap. I know, Dewey, you talked a little bit about what has been done to coordinate those 2 codes, but there's anything else you would like to add and share with our participants? I think this would be a great opportunity to do that.
Sure.
Thanks, Daisy.
Go ahead, Joe.
This is Joe. I'll go ahead and answer the first part of that. The question was, you know, when is the MAC, is it going to become enforceable? The short answer is that CDC is not a regulatory agency. So the guidance that we put out is just that. The recommendations that public health officials can use if they choose to. But the things that we put out are not considered law or enforceable rules. With the hope of the MAC is it's a guidance document that can be used by state and local health officials when they modify or make additions to or update their pool codes. The hope is that they would use all of the MAC, but changing existing codes is a pretty difficult process. Adding to code that doesn't exist already for brand new concepts regarding swimming is a lot easier. And the MAC is a great place to go so you don't have to reinvent the wheel and putting those new concepts to fill your particular public health needs and gaps.
This is Emily. I had a question come in before the start of this webinar, and this is a question on behalf of the Association for Swimming Ponds and Natural Swimming Pools. The question is, what has been done or will be done for addressing the request to develop guidelines for natural swimming pools and biological filtration systems? The Technical Review Committee has recommended the formation of an ad hoc committee. How would this committee be formed? Who would be involved? And when would this process start?
Well, I could take that. So I know probably a little bit more discussion there on appropriateness of inclusion, but with regards to an ad hoc committee, we probably would look at doing that sometime in 2022. Get through this year. As far as who would be included on that committee, we would make a call for membership to serve on that committee. We always try to include, or really our new practice now, is we always want to have on every committee at least 2 local public health officials. And that's really, really key to have your input and your, your opinions and your expertise as health officials. So that'd be one thing that we would look at as having on there. And of course, having a mix of industry and design individuals. But the big thing is our call would go out to our membership, and you do have to be a member to serve on any CMAHC committee. So that would be kind of first step.
You Dewey. So the next question also came up in our chat, is asking about what test kit system is capable of testing 300 cyanuric acid without dilution. Would you know that by the top of your head, Dewey, or we can always follow up on this question too?
Yeah, we'll have to follow up on specific tests. Really, to get away from dilution, you would have to start looking at some of the photometric type test kits. And those can be a little pricey, and they're certainly cost more than the $50, $60, $70 kits that we normally see in use at venues or even by officials. But you definitely look more for a photometric kit. That would be the best chance of having one that can test higher without dilution. I would honestly have to go back and do a little bit more research to make sure that any kit that I mentioned would cover that without dilution.
Next question we had is, the pH operational limit was lowered from 7.2 to 7.0, but what happened with a change request raising the high end of the pH limit from 7.8 to 8.0 or to 8.2?
Yeah, membership did not approve those. So those were not affirmed and received no votes. So if we're interested in seeing that change to a higher range, we can always resubmit for the 5th edition.
Thank you, Dewey. So our next question is asking about the CVRS. How often the CRVS should be tested?
Joe, do you know of a specific date, time? I haven't seen one.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question? I was reading some other questions that are coming in.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
no problem, Joe. So we have a question asking how often the CVRS should be tested. The SVRS, sorry.
And just for everyone's benefit, SVRS stands for suction vacuum release system.
I don't think that is specifically addressed in the MAC. I would for sure refer to the manufacturer instructions and follow the guidance there.
It may be somewhere in the CPA, the Consumer Product Safety Commission recommendations. As an operator, I'll just answer it with my operator hat on. I would say minimum of once a month, but keep in mind, it's not in the MAC. And honestly, I haven't seen it addressed in BGB or any CPSC information. But definitely, as Joe mentioned, manufacturer is always best, but I'd say minimum as an operator once a month.
The next question we have is, have the BOD recommendations been posted on the CMAHC website? If not, when will they be posted?
Christy, they're already posted, correct?
Well, I'm looking right now because I thought they were, and I was hoping to be able to provide, a place to go. The members votes are, if you're a member and you go to the members area, you can see how the members voted. I will have to follow up because I thought it was up. I'm just not finding it. So hopefully before the end of all the questions, I can answer this question. I will work on this.
One thing while Christy's looking for that and we're answering questions, just kind of a shameless plug, make sure you check back with cmac.org. If you're not a regular visitor, make sure you check back in the next few months. We are developing a new website that we are hoping will be tons more functional and much more user-friendly.
Thank you, Dewey. Our next question is about where can I find recommendations for pool equipment, kickboards, dumbbells, noodles, sanitation?
I'm assuming this is a question regarding COVID guidelines.
Yeah, that's what I am assuming.
I would refer you over to CDC's website, and right at the very top of one of the higher banners at the top of the page is for COVID guidelines, and we do have recommendations in there for swimming pools and recreational water areas, including beaches, and we have some disinfection guidance posted in there for you.
What is the rubric used by the BOD to decide what is revolutionary?
I think it's important to note that our board of directors is made up of a lot of really, really knowledgeable health inspectors, public health folks, industry folks, folks that have long histories in service and operations and construction and regulation. So to answer the question, there may not necessarily be a rubric, right? There's not really a flow chart for something like that. It is a discussion about the combined experiences and knowledge base and looking at a particular change request and trying to anticipate what are going to be the industry impacts, right? How much actual work, impact, expense, cost will go into implementing that change request. So instead of necessarily a defined rubric, like a Likert scale or any sort of weighing, it's more discussion based from those really high caliber expert individuals. Christy, is there anything else you want to add on that particular aspect?
No, I think that's great. Thanks, Dewey.
I'll just add a couple thoughts from CDC's perspective. When we're considering any kind of change, there's usually some routine questions that we always ask about the cost, the operational feasibility, the impacts that it's going to have on bathers, the positive or negative impacts it's going to have on safety and public health protection. So those types of discussions are usually not simple.
Okay, so our next question is two parts, and I believe we already start answering the first one when you're talking about the new website, Dewey. But the first one is where on the website you can find the vote on the code results. They seem to cannot find this information, can only find the CRs themselves. And the second one, you stated that 2 CRs recommended by TRC for operational ratio limit range from 2.5 to 26 to 1 and closure at 75 to 909 parts per million of the cyanuric acid were different from the CMAHC BOD. Can you please comment on what changes will be made, if any, what CRs passed or not overturned pertaining to the operational cyanuric acid limit or minimum and max DPG or max operational not closure of the ratio. So very specific and technical question. Hopefully, Dewey or Joe, you guys can take that one.
I'll start with just where to find the votes. When you're a member, when you sign in into the membership area, you go under display change request vote, and then that will show you how the membership voted.
And Dewey, if you don't mind, I'll take a first crack at the answering the rest of the CYA questions here. The long story short, when we got the change request in for cyanuric acid, there were some to lower the levels. There were some to raise the level. There were some to incorporate a sliding ratio. It was very complex. There were some conflicts between those CRs, as you can imagine. So at the end of the day, there really aren't too many changes to the CYA guidance, except the 2 that were outlined by Dewey. In particular, and I think I saw a question earlier about the 90 parts per million. That just states the operating level. That in the current edition of the MAHC, the 90 is not necessarily associated with an intimate health hazard and is not listed for immediate closure. So we wanted to have something in there for an immediate closure for an excess level for an added chemical. And the 300 parts per million is based on the EPA's toxicity findings for human exposure to CYA. So now, if you get above 300, it would warrant closure. But above 90 does not necessarily warrant closure. So the associated ratio of 45 to 1, as Dewey indicated, is a de facto ratio kind of already built into the MAHC with a routine operating chlorine level of 2 parts per million and that operating level of cyanuric acid of 90. That ratio is 45 to 1. But just because you go above 2 parts per million doesn't necessarily mean your pool's going to get closed. So if you have 4 parts per million, you're still within your operating standards. And that would allow the 45 to 1 ratio, the CYA, to slide up as well, all the way up until you hit that 300 parts per million mark. So those are really the only changes that we had for the CYA. We didn't lower the operating max, and we didn't incorporate some of the suggested ratios that involve a little bit of math and a little bit more thought. We wanted to focus on the measurables and the operating considerations. Do you want to add anything there?
Yeah, no, I was going to take the easy answer, which is there's really no changes to operating guidelines. So
correct.
Yeah, there was really none. It was just the imminent health hazards, some definitions, and operator training.
The next question is regarding the harmonization. So you talked about harmonizing the MAC with the International Swimming Pool and Spa Code. And there was a question on why there was no harmonization with the International Association of Plumbing and Mechanical Officials Swimming Pool, Spa, and Hot Tub Code.
I'm going to toss this one over to Joe and Michelle, as this committee predated me.
Yeah, Michelle, do you have any historical context? We really don't have the right CDC person on this call to answer that. I know there's a lot of building codes out there, and some of the guidance that was selected to begin work with years ago really was focused on public health. But I don't have a really good answer for why ATMO isn't part of the harmonization. Michelle, do you have anything?
I haven't heard of anything. Can you hear me?
No, we got you.
Okay. I haven't heard anything, but there's been a lot of changeover with who's working on the MAC at CDC and CMAHC. So we're going to have to go back to our predecessors and come back with an answer for you.
So the next one is asking about the BOD meetings, if those recordings and meeting minutes are available. Is this something you posted on your website, Christian Dewey?
They are not posted on our website, but if somebody would like a copy, we'd be happy to share. So if they just want to contact us.
We will share our email address on the chat with everyone here. And if all these follow-up questions, feel free to send us an email and we'll be happy to forward those to our panelists and get those answers back to you.
Next question is, do you address Nagleria Fowlery concerns, especially related to surf venues and artificial swimming lagoons and water parks using river water?
Well, Nagleria is one of those organisms that makes us nervous every summer. Mostly, for those of you that don't know, it has an extremely high fatality rate. So if someone gets infected with Nagleria by getting untreated water, usually from warm natural bodies of water up their nose, it is more than likely going to be fatal. So the short answer to that question is yes. Both the artificial swimming lagoons and the surf venues want to maintain some chlorine residual or halogen disinfectant residual in the designated swimming areas.
And Joe, if I can add to that, in terms of Nagleria, I think it's a really difficult issue to address in non-standard pools. We know that Nagleria does not cause infections if the pool is properly treated. At least the cases up until recently have all been in untreated waters, such as lakes, or there's been a really poorly maintained or operated or managed pool. This past summer, we did investigate a case in Texas where the drinking water was not well managed in terms of chlorination, I believe, or they just, no, sorry, not well managed is the wrong way to say that. Sorry, they went with chloramination as opposed to chlorination. I apologize for that mix up. I'm thinking of something else. And so there was a case of Nagleria associated with using a water playground in the community. Unfortunately, that water playground wasn't operated well, and because the water for the city water was chloraminated, a child passed away. So that's something we are talking about here, as well as the case of Nagleria that was associated with the surf venue a couple years back in Texas as well. Joe is working with colleagues in public health and in the aquatic sector to address artificial lagoons, because we weren't able to get a full CR ready to go, ready for, I guess, ready to be live in time for the submission of the CR. So he's working on that. I'm working on the surf venue, and that's definitely something on our radar.
Thank you. So the next question is asking about recreational water illnesses. So CDC has recently been quoted saying that 60% of all the recreational water illnesses are related to biofilms. Did the new MAC address use of effective biocides or other circulation systems, cleaning products designed to accommodate piping frequency of filter bed and camera inspection inside pipes? Is this something that was addressed in this edition of the MAC?
There weren't any change requests specifically targeting this, but it is noted that in section 6, when we talk about illnesses in the hot tubs and spas, that a treatment scenario for biofilms is addressed. But no, as far as specific use of biocides or specific treatment for biofilms separately, no, that wasn't included in these change requests.
And this is Michelle, and I would add to that the majority of the majority or a big substantial portion of the cases of waterborne illness were actually cases of swimmer's ear, so caused by Pseudomonas. We also know that Legionnaire's disease caused a significant portion of the deaths associated with waterborne disease, and these are both pathogens that are associated with biofilm. I know the Healthy Swimming Program here is making plans to look further at swimmer's ear in the U.S. and figure out ways to prevent it. Currently, we have recommendations on the CDC website. We have looked at antibiotic usage in patients diagnosed with swimmer's ear. So there are issues to be addressed there, but I believe it was something like there were 2 million cases of swimmer's ear and you had 7 million cases of waterborne disease illness. So just addressing swimmer's ear alone is going to be a big issue. Not all of that came from pools. And those data did not come out till, I believe, December or January. So they are not addressed in this edition of the MAC, and we'll see how those data will affect the next edition, the 2024 edition of the MAC.
I have a follow-up answer to a question about the results. So when you are signed in the members area on the CMAHC website, if you go to display change request vote, it will pull up a page and it says right under the heading of the page, it says results are now available for vote on the code 2020. Please see below and click here for a detailed look at vote results per change request. So if you click the link where it says click here, it will take you through all the change requests, how the TRC recommended, what their vote recommendation was, how the membership voted, and then at the end of that document, it will share with you how the board of directors voted and the recommendations that they sent to the CDC. I will tell you at our last meeting, we did make a couple of adjustments and edits to that document that we'll be sending an amendment to you, the CDC. That is not up yet, but everything else is there. So that is posted. I'm sorry, it was even hard for me to find, so I apologize for that.
Thank you so much. With that, this will conclude today's webinar. We are right here at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So I really want to say a big thank you to all our panelists and also to all participants. If you have any questions, if maybe because of timing we couldn't get to all your questions, please feel free to send us an email at macnet@nature.org. Also, we included the link here. If you're interested in receiving emails from us regarding future webinars or opportunities to get involved and participate, please join Nature's MAC network. It is a free community of practice of those who are interested in learning more about the MAC and subject matter experts on this field. So just follow the link and subscribe, and you receive emails from us when those opportunities become available. With that, we hope to see you in our next webinar in a few months. But if you have any questions, please do feel free to reach out to us. Thank you again, and we hope everyone have a great week.